Jesus called his 12 disciples to him and gave them authority to drive out evil spirits and to heal every disease and sickness.
The Bible contains remarkable stories of miracles and divine interventions. Moses parted the sea. Peter healed a man lame from his mother's womb. Jesus drove demons out of people and raised others from the dead. But are these types of events still happening today?
We too have a beam of divine light and guidance that God has put within the heart of every man. And it's one of the greatest proofs that there is a God.
More amazing supernatural things are happening than we realize.
This is Divine Intervention, the interview show that features intriguing people who've experienced the hand of God in amazing ways. Divine Intervention was created and produced with the purpose of encouraging believers, spiritual seekers, and skeptics alike that Jesus is alive and is still performing miracles and working in the world today.
I believe in miracles.
Here's your host, Daniel Fazina.
Hello, friend, and welcome to Divine Intervention Radio. Yes, that's right. I am your host, Daniel Fazina. So excited to be with you today. Got another very inspirational story with a couple of really amazing guests to share with you. We're going to be focusing a little bit on the entertainment industry today and what God is doing in that arena. And we've got two Hollywood producers going to be joining us to talk about their new film. So it's going to be very exciting. But before we do that, I'd just like to remind you that you can tune in to Divine Intervention anytime on the web. DivineInterventionRadio.com. DivineInterventionRadio.com is the website. You can check out all the archives there, get some information about the show and all the amazing guests we featured. You can also find us on Facebook, Facebook.com/Divine Intervention Radio. You can follow me, Daniel Fazina, on Twitter. I'm at Daniel Fazina1. That's at Daniel Fazina, the numeral 1 on Twitter.com. And of course, you can always drop me a line. If Divine Intervention Radio has made a positive impact in your life or affected you in some way, I would love to hear about it. If you've been encouraged, to keep your faith in the Lord, or maybe you've entered into a personal relationship with the Lord for the first time as a result of listening to the show, I would love to hear about it. So please do email me. I'm at divineintervention@mail.com, divineintervention@mail.com. Friend, I also want to encourage you to check out my book, Divine Intervention, 50 True Stories of God's Miracles Today. It is a collection of miracle testimonies from people I've interviewed from all over the world who've experienced things like answered prayers, miraculous healings, near-death experiences, conversion experiences, all sorts of ways in which God has intervened in the lives of ordinary people. It's kind of like Chicken Soup for the Soul meets the Bible. So if you're a believer, it's really going to encourage you. And if you're a skeptic, it's really going to challenge you. But this book is a great conversation starter. Maybe you can pick one up and give it to a non-believing friend who can, read some amazing true stories. And there's actually medical documentation in there. You can see x-rays of bullets in people's bodies, and you can read medical reports from places like the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, and Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. So it gives a little bit more credibility and veracity to the stories. You can also connect with the individual people themselves in the book, because I put in their contact information and photographs, so you can tell that these are real people with real amazing miracle stories. So I hope that will help to bolster the credibility of what God is doing in the world today. And maybe it'll encourage a skeptic to dig deeper and really, ask themselves the question, is God real? Is he there? Maybe they'll seek him. And that's the goal of the book. I want to encourage believers and challenge unbelievers into looking into a relationship with God. All right, friend, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first guest. He is the producer of the amazing new film, Captive. Now, Captive is the film we're going to be talking about and focusing on today. This is kind of a media-centric show because we're going to be featuring the story, a true story, actually, of how God worked in the lives of two people. The film is called Captive, and it stars David Oyelowo and Kate Mara, and it's based on an inspiring true story that drew the attention of the entire nation. It's a thrilling drama about the spiritual collision of two broken lives. When Brian Nichols, on the run as the subject of a citywide manhunt and desperate to make contact with his newborn son, takes recovering meth addict Ashley Smith hostage in her own apartment, she turns for guidance to Rick Warren's best-selling inspirational book, The Purpose-Driven Life. While reading the book aloud, Ashley and her would-be killer each face crossroads where despair and death intersect hope. I saw this film, Captive, and it is brilliant. It is very well done, well acted. It keeps you on the edge of your seat. It's a really powerful film. The acting, again, is superb, and the directing as well. Again, it stars David Oyelowo, who you may have seen from Selma, and Kate Mara does an amazing job portraying Ashley Smith. Kate Mara, you may have seen her in The Martian and other films. And today to talk about the film is one of the producers, Terry Botwick, and he's got an interesting background himself, being a Jewish believer in Jesus. He also has an extensive resume in film and television production. He currently heads up 1019 Entertainment and oversees all aspects of the company's business and film and TV production. He has produced an award-winning documentary on climate change called Cool It. In addition to that, he has been the president of Vanguard Films and Animation, which produced Space Chimps for Fox. And he's also been the president and COO of Big Idea Productions, which produced VeggieTales. And it's my pleasure to welcome Terry Botwick right now to Divine Intervention Radio. Terry, welcome to Divine Intervention Radio. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Not a problem. So, I just saw your amazing film, Captive, and of course, we definitely want to get into that. But before we do, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background? How did this nice Jewish boy in Hollywood come to know Jesus?
Well, I will do the shorter version of the story, but I was born into a conservative Jewish family, and, bar mitzvah, and went to Hebrew school as a kid, and always had a sense of God being there. And at the, sort of tail end of the 60s, early 70s, people were generally searching. I was certainly searching, and had a lot of spiritual and sometimes supernatural experiences trying to find God. And, no matter what you search through, you cannot help but bump into Jesus, because everybody has to talk about him and deal with him. And of course, as a Jew, it's important for me to say that Jesus never said anything or did anything outside of a Jewish context. And so for me, Jesus is the Messiah. He's my Messiah. And, sometimes because of church culture, which emanates from Scotland or Germany or different places, we fail to make that connection to the biblical Jewish roots. In fact, Christianity was not even a distinct religion from Judaism until about the 4th century. So,
right.
So all of that just to say that being a Jew and believing in Jesus is not inconsistent at all.
Amen to that. I totally agree, and I'm seeing more and more the convergence of Christianity and Judaism, where we're returning to our Jewish roots, and I think that's a wonderful thing. How did your Jewish family react when you decided to follow Jesus?
Well, it depended on the person. My mother became a believer. My sister became a believer.
Awesome.
My dad, is very quiet, so I'm not quite sure what he reconciled internally, but he has definitely seen a lot of change in my life and in my sister's life. My grandmother, of course, who came from, a generation of people who saw their villages wiped out, leading into World War II and during World War II. For her, she couldn't make the distinction between, for her, you're a Jew or you're a Gentile.
Right.
And if you're a Gentile, then you're one of those bad people who were killing Jews. So
wow.
she had a real hard time with it. But the fact is, God comes into our lives, he changes our lives, and no matter what our experience leading into that is the greatest testimony. It's not so much what we say, but it's who we become.
Right. Amen. Well, I'm glad to hear that you're walking with the Lord, and that some of your family are as well. Now let's get into this very amazing film. I had the opportunity to watch it the other night, Captive, and what a beautiful film. It's tragic, it's redemptive, it's keeps you on the edge of your seat. What an amazing story. Tell me, how did this film come to you, and why did you decide to get involved as a producer and greenlight it, basically?
Well, Captive is an amazing redemptive story, and going back to my Jewish roots, I'm really interested in an authentic experience with God. It's not for me about, believers talking to believers about things we already believe, which is fine, for the church to edify itself. But I don't see movies necessarily as a direct vehicle for evangelism. I think stories are best when they are causing us to ask questions and wrestle with the things at our core that we believe. And, Abraham, for instance, when God, he has an experience with God that's undeniable. This is the God of the universe. He didn't have the Bible to rely on to figure that out. So he had some sort of an experience that, he clearly could identify as the God of the universe coming into his life. And on the way to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, he stops, and the angel of the Lord says he's going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, and Abraham struggles with that.
Right.
At the core of it, would you destroy the whole place if there's 50 good people, 40 good people, 30 good people, it gets down to 10 good people? And at the core of it is the question we all ask, who are you, God? What is your nature really like? Most people, I think, out there who have a hard time believing in God are asking the same question. It's how does all these bad things in the world happen if there's a good God out there? And so to me, stories are best about raising those questions through characters who have dramatic experiences that lead them to wrestle with these common issues of life that we all struggle with.
Wow. Friend, you're listening to Divine Intervention Radio. I'm your host, Daniel Fazina, and we are visiting with our special guest, Terry Botwick. He's the producer of the new film Captive, which tells the gripping story of two very broken people who come together in a very traumatic circumstance, only to find some hope and redemption in there. Terry, can you give us a sense of a synopsis of the story for those who are not familiar with it?
Absolutely. Captive is a true story. It took place in 2005 in Atlanta, Georgia, on March 11th, 2005. Ashley Smith was a single mom. She was addicted to crystal meth. She had lost custody of her daughter as a result. She, a couple of years earlier, her husband had been killed by drug dealers. Her life was in a downward spiral, and she was an incredibly broken person.
Wow.
She was raised in a Christian home. Brian Nichols was on trial for rape. It was the third day of the trial, and he was being taken to his holding cell. He beat a female detective to get free. She's still actually not normal to this day. He got a gun. He shot and killed a federal judge, a court reporter, and another detective making his escape, and then later a fourth man stealing his truck. And at 2 a.m, he took Ashley hostage in her own apartment.
Wow.
And the core of the story is about what happens between those two people in the darkest time for each of them, how God and his light can break through. And part of that, I think, is Ashley treated him like a human being, and I think that somehow diffused this rampage he was on. I think that she's heroic, because I think many, many more people would have been killed that night had the encounter with Ashley not happened. But at the same time, she saw in Brian Nichols, she gave him drugs that night. He tried to force her to take drugs at gunpoint, and she saw in him an ultimatum from God. If you take those drugs, you will lose your life forever at gunpoint.
Wow.
If you do not take those drugs, I will give you your life. And she got to a point in her life where, for her, if not taking those drugs meant only 5 more minutes of life, because he was a dangerous guy, but it was a life that God wanted her to have versus staying physically alive but losing her soul. She made that choice to turn and to follow God, and she's never taken drugs since that day 10 years later.
That's amazing. That was a very powerful scene in the movie where David Oyelowo is holding the gun to Kate Mara's head, the actress, and they did a phenomenal job in bringing those raw emotions to the scene, and also really portraying humanity. I mean, you see that the good and the evil, the light and the darkness contrasted very well in that film.
Well, it's one of the reasons, Daniel, that we're seeing the cinema scores on this movie, it opened this past weekend, are the highest of any movie over the weekend. And everywhere we've screened it, every audience that we talk to are so impacted by this movie, and it really helps to have two incredibly fine actors, that can reveal the deep pain in their souls, throughout this dramatic story.
Yes, and it's amazing. It's not over the top preachy either. It's not at all. And I love the fact that you tell this story. It's a true story. I love true stories myself, true redemption stories, and that's one of the reasons why I do Divine Intervention Radio. I have people share their testimonies of how God has worked in their lives, and this film, Captive, does just that in the lives of these people. So it's phenomenal, I think. And I wanted to ask you. I always ask this of directors and people who are involved in a film, especially a film that the center is really about God and His redemption. How did you see God move in the production of this film, and what have the results been? Have people been impacted by the Lord through this film, either in the making of it or in the viewing of it?
Yeah, I think the answer to both those questions is yes, they have. I mean, it's shocking that 10 years later in Atlanta, Georgia, there is still a rawness over this story. For those listeners who remember, this story was major national headlines 10 years ago as a massive manhunt was underway for Brian Nichols.
Right.
It is the first major national story of a lot of what we're seeing erupt in our cities all over again with racially driven violence. And when we showed the movie in Atlanta, I was able to have Judge Barnes' widow with me, and
wow.
And people who came to this screening with very different feelings about that incident. As I said, it's very raw for these people still, and
right.
It definitely brought a sense of healing and closure. Another story during production, David Wilhelm, who is the customs agent who was killed for his truck, his widow lived in the Charlotte area where we shot the movie, and she came to set. And it was, again, a real sense of closure for her. She came with some trepidation, but it was real closure for her as we were able to embrace her. Every day on the set, we would remind people, this is a story about real people's lives. And although it was redemptive for Ashley, there were 4 people who lost their lives, and they have families who miss them. And so we have to be mindful of that. David Wilhelm's brother lives in the Charlotte area. We actually wound up making a donation to the foundation in his honor. The actual truck that was used, that Brian Nichols sold, and we used that in the movie.
Oh, wow.
As maybe listeners might remember, the thing that happened that night is Ashley had been given a copy of Purpose Driven Life,
right,
which she'd been reading, and she read it to Brian Nichols. And here's another amazing thing, and I just learned a couple of these things. David Wilhelm was working in a new job, and his widow Candy told me that he was insecure about this new job, and 1 week before the murder, he had been given a copy of Purpose Driven Life and was reading it.
Oh, wow.
And then Judge Barnes' widow, Claudia, told me that the day of the murder, when her husband was killed, when she finally got to go back, anonymously, she opened up the mailbox, and someone anonymously, to this day, she doesn't know who it was, put a copy of Purpose Driven Life in her mailbox.
The day her husband was murdered?
The day her husband was murdered.
Wow.
So 2 people that were murdered, and Ashley Smith was held hostage but was let go, all given copies of Purpose Driven Life within this short period of time, and it played a role. And, some people, to be honest, every once in a while you see someone go, well, this movie's kind of a commercial for Purpose Driven Life. It's happened. It was true.
Right.
Somehow God used this circumstance and this incredible event as also a catalyst related to that book. And so rather than approaching these things critically, I approach them as just saying, this is the mystery of God. He just connects these dots and does these things. That's
amazing. And I guess for anyone who may be doubting that the purpose-driven life is being used by God, I mean, this film is just one small testimony of how it has been used and how it is being used to change a lot of lives and and help a lot of people, because there are some skeptics out there who say, oh, it's really not, a Christian book, or it's, not of God or whatever. But I would beg to differ, and as evidenced by, the film Captive, it just demonstrates how God is using that book, and I think it's a wonderful thing. Friend, again, you're listening to Divine Intervention Radio. I'm your host, Daniel Fazina, and our special guest today is Terry Botwick. He is the producer of the amazing film Captive, which I highly recommend you check out. It is an amazing film, wonderfully produced, acted, directed, and just a really powerful, true story of redemption in the midst of darkness. So Terry, when you took on this project, what was it about the script and the story that really wanted you to go ahead with it, and what is your goal? What do you want audiences to take away from when they watch this film?
Well, I think at the end of the day that I look for stories that have truth in them, that obviously they have to be dramatic,
right.
But that have truth in them and that have a resonance for all of us together. So, you and I may not be meth addicts, but we're all held captive to something. We all have areas of our lives that have more control of us than we would like, and we struggle with those things.
Right.
And, I don't know any person, if they're honest, who hasn't hit some point in their life where they feel like they've failed so miserably it's hard to come back. And this is a very dramatic version of that, but even more so for each of us. If God could reach into the lives of Ashley Smith and Brian Nichols on that night and offer two incredibly broken people a second chance to find their created purpose and to live it out, then God can do that for any of us.
That is amazing. I wanted to ask you, if there's someone listening to this interview right now who maybe doesn't believe in God or is struggling with doubt or lack of purpose in their life, what would you like to say to those people?
Well, I would like to say, Jesus said, seek and you shall find. And so I guess my comment would be, it's not about how hard you work. It's not how good you are. It's not about what church you go to or who you give your money to. It's about being willing to come to the God of the universe who created you and just ask you being honest questions and let God speak for himself. He's very capable of doing that. I think sometimes we run around, particularly in the American evangelical church, and we're defending God, and, God's big enough to defend himself. So if you have those questions, I would say, just bring them to God. Be honest about them. God is not afraid of your honest emotions. And if you have an honest desire to see God work in your life, he will show up.
Awesome. Good advice. I appreciate that. And I guess another thing I'd like to ask you is, being a veteran of Hollywood and the film industry and also being a believer in Jesus, sometimes that can be a difficult road to walk. And I want to know if you have any advice for other believers who might want to venture into the entertainment industry and how to do that successfully without compromising their beliefs in the Lord.
I think there's two things to say about that. The first is learn how to do what you do excellently, because if you do good work, it will find a way into the marketplace.
Okay.
I wouldn't lead with my faith, and even though, Hollywood sees there's a market among Christians now, I wouldn't necessarily lead with that. I think it's, again, about doing great work and let the stories speak for themselves, and I think that then opens up opportunities. Paramount Pictures, one of the major studios, is distributing Captive, and it was amazing to me because we made a good movie that they were interested in acquiring it, and all of a sudden you find yourself in conversations about God and about the audience and how the audience relates to God and how you deliver the movie to the audience, and you're having conversations with people in the industry that you'd never have otherwise if you just sort of walked in and tried to beat them over the head with your faith. And so I would just say, live your life, live your life with integrity, do great work, and build relationships, and opportunities will expose themselves.
That is excellent advice. Wow. Terry Botwick, producer of Captive, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to share with us, and I encourage you to keep up the great work you're doing. in the industry and witnessing for the Lord, and I wish you all the best with Captive and whatever else the Lord has for you. So thank you again, sir.
Daniel, thank you, and last word to all the listeners, every day is important, so please, if you like what you've heard, if you're intrigued by Captive, don't wait till tomorrow, go see it tonight. It's playing in theaters across the country right now. Okay,
and can you give out the website so people can check out the trailer?
Yeah, absolutely. The website is captivethemovie.com, and I would also encourage people to go to the Facebook page, Facebook Captive Movie, and there's a ton of resources, ton of great video and testimonies and resources for people there.
All right. Once again, Terry Botwick, producer of the new movie Captive. Go see it. I'm Daniel Fazzina. We'll be right back with more on Divine Intervention Radio. Stay with us.
We'll be right back with more from Daniel Fazzina and Divine Intervention right after this.
I believe in miracles.
Hey, this is Danny Johnson, ABC's Secret Millionaire, and you're listening to Divine Intervention Radio with Daniel Fazzina.
Times are tough, not getting easier, but there's an opportunity that could make a significant change in your financial situation. People are paying too much for home utilities, and everybody has them. Help friends and family save money and get paid for it. No obligation. You don't even have to talk to anyone unless you want to. Just listen to a 3-minute recorded message. Call now, 715-GET-CASH. That's 715-GET-CASH. Listen, decide, and you could be on your way to a better tomorrow. 715-438-2274. That's 715-GET-CASH. Divine Intervention welcomes the support of Latirzo Associates, Certified Public Accountants. Latirzo Associates, Certified Public Accountants is a family-owned and operated Christian business serving their clients with quality accounting services for over 40 years, offering full-service accounting for any type of business, large or small, in any state of the union. Latirzo Associates, Certified Public Accountants, 12 Oak Street, No. 5, West Hampton Beach, New York, 11978. Phone 631-288-3334. That's 631-288-3334.
Hey, I'm L.A. Marzulli, author, lecturer, filmmaker, and you're listening to Divine Intervention with Daniel Fazzina.
You call me out upon the waters, the great unknown, where feet may fail. And there I find you in the mystery, in oceans deep. My faith will stand.
Welcome back to Divine Intervention Radio. I'm your host, Daniel Fazzina. Thanks so much for tuning in. Friend, if you're just joining us, we've been speaking about the wonderful and beautiful new film called Captive. In this film, it's a true story, and it's about a story that actually riveted the nation. A woman taken hostage by an escaped killer found an unexpected way out by reading Rick Warren's best-selling book, The Purpose-Driven Life, aloud to her captor. The film stars David Oyelowo, who you may have seen in Selma, playing the role of Martin Luther King Jr., and it also stars Kate Mara, who you may have seen in the recent film The Martian with Matt Damon. It's an amazingly well-done film, full of drama, redemption, danger, and it keeps you on the edge of your seat. Just a really quality film with a really powerful story. Before the break, we were talking to one of the lead producers, Terry Botwick, and right now I have the privilege of introducing you to the executive producer and screenplay writer, Brian Bird. Now, Brian is a 25-year veteran screenwriter and producer whose first break came as a 24-year-old writer on the iconic television series Fantasy Island. Most recently, he wrote and co-produced the feature film Not Easily Broken, adapted from the novel by Bishop T.D. Jakes for Sony TriStar, along with 2 films for 20th Century Fox, Saving Sarah Kane in 2008, an adaptation of the book by best-selling faith-based author Beverly Lewis, and The Last Sin Eater, 2007, based on the novel by Francine Rivers. Bird's other film credits include the Morgan Freeman-directed Bofa for Paramount Pictures, and the Hallmark Hall of Fame drama Captive Heart, starring Louis Gossett Jr. and Ruby Dee. His script, Call Me Claus, produced by Garth Brooks and starring Whoopi Goldberg and Sir Nigel Hawthorne, was the highest-rated cable TV film of 2002. Between 1998 and 2003, Bird served as a co-executive producer and senior writer for 5 seasons on the series Touched by an Angel. In all, his TV series producing and writing credits include more than 250 episodes of the series Touched by an Angel, as well as the comedies Evening Shade, Step by Step, and The Family Man. Prior to his work in Hollywood, Bird was a staff reporter for the San Gabriel Valley Tribune and the director of public relations for World Vision. He holds a degree in journalism from California State University at Fullerton. His best productions to date are his 5 children with his wife Patty of 29 years. Brian and Patty are active members of Saddleback Church, where Bird serves a variety of media consulting roles to Pastor Rick Warren. And it's my pleasure to welcome Brian Bird right now on Divine Intervention Radio. Brian, welcome to Divine Intervention Radio. Thank you so much for joining us.
My honor, Dan. Really appreciate being asked to be part of your show.
Oh, it's no problem. I've been excited to talk to you for quite a while now, even before I heard about your latest project, Captive, which was an amazing film, and we're going to get your perspective and your take on that. But before we do that, why don't we go to the beginning a little bit? Tell us about your background and your faith journey. How did you come to faith in the Lord?
Well, I come from a family of pastors.
Okay.
My grandfather was a pastor in the Foursquare movement, early days of the Foursquare movement, and my father kind of followed in his footsteps, and my uncle, his younger brother, my Uncle Dan, has been involved in ministry and as a worship pastor for 40 years too. So I come from a long sort of faith tradition in my own family, and I made a profession of faith at a young age. I was 7 years old up in Salinas, California, where we were living at the time. And
7 years old, wow.
7 years old, and sort of reaffirmed my faith, when I was in college, sort of going through a secular college, sort of asking all the existential questions that, most college students either ask or are prompted to ask by their professors. And I had a great believing professor in journalism school. I was in journalism school, and this professor, I sort of went to him with some of my questions, because as you know, we can't inherit our faith. We have to embrace it. We have to own it.
Right. It has to be your own, right?
So, right. And sometimes it's easy as a little kid to do that, but then you get confronted with the reality of the world and all of the multitude of questions and religious beliefs of other people. And, sometimes it can sort of seem chaotic. And so this Dr. Smythe, one of my journalism professors, said to me, do not be afraid of the marketplace of ideas, because truth will always rise to the top.
Wow.
And it was a powerful thought for me there, and he helped me sort of stabilize my relationship with Christ as a college student. And I know in today's culture, a lot of millennials and college-age young people are sort of walking away from the faith of their fathers, and the tsunami of cultural change is hitting us and swamping our culture. And I might have been one of those kids had I been born 30 years later or something. But I had some really strong mentors in my life at that time, and sort of helped me sort of launch my adult life as a believer, and I've just been a disciple ever since.
That's wonderful. And I think it's really refreshing to see that you took your faith with you into the workplace and into the entertainment industry. which desperately needs salt and light. So I really want to applaud your efforts there, and thank you for being salt and light in such an influential arena. So thank you again.
Well, you know what? It's really just my calling, right? It's what I feel like God has put on my heart, at least, to do way back when I was a young man, and just trying to be faithful to the calling and be a good steward of those opportunities, and not think too highly of myself, but just try to be as excellent as I can, because I'm reflecting the author of the universe. And
I love that. That is a wonderful, sage piece of advice there for anyone. You know, we're to work unto the Lord, so whatever we do it unto Him, not as if we're working for an earthly boss. And so we should do the best we possibly can as far as quality, and you know, that's obviously reflected in your work over the years. You know, with you've done so much in television. Touched by an Angel is an iconic television series. You worked on that for 5 years. You've even gotten your break on Fantasy Island, which I used to watch as a kid. That's really cool.
Right.
I love that show.
And I was kind of a kid when it happened. I was 4 years old when that opportunity came. That was my first cup of coffee in the big leagues, was writing an episode of that show. And, you know, interestingly, I mean, people who are old enough, I guess, to remember that show, you know, sort of remember it as this kind of strange island that people would go to, and there was this mysterious host, Mr. Rourke, who would grant them their wish,
right?
But always sort of lead to a moral lesson,
right?
And it was actually, I think, a metaphor for God's relationship with us. That's the way I viewed it at the time. It was sort of mythological in some ways, but Mr. Rourke had the power over life and death, and over circumstances, and could bring, you know, circumstances into the characters' lives that would shape them and change them and ground them, you know, or lead them back onto the right path. So I was honored to have an opportunity to do it was just one episode in the final season that the show was on, but it sort of gave me a break. And I loved it so much I didn't want to stop doing those kinds of projects.
That's wonderful. And you've since moved on. Obviously, God has expanded your territory, so to speak, and honored your commitment to Him and your craft as you got more excellent at it. You, like I said, you went on to do movies and also Touched by an Angel, and now this amazing new film called Captive. And you're the executive producer, and also you wrote the screenplay. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, wonderful. Now, how did this story come to you, and what was it about it that attracted you and you know, made you want to get involved?
Well, let me tell you, it was a case of divine intervention.
Oh, I love those.
Yeah, I know you do.
Do tell.
It's actually appropriate right now for your show, because in 2008, I had a big disaster on a project. The project fell apart halfway through.
Oh boy!
Filming the movie halfway through. The financing fell apart when the sky was falling on the world economy. If you can remember, in September of 2008, I mean, Lehman Brothers melted down, AIG melted down. Banks were freezing their money. Nobody was making loans, and we were in the middle of filming, and the people who were financing the film we were producing, they just basically dried up and disappeared on us, and it forced us to shut it down. And, you know, it's not cancer or famine, but in the movie business, no worse problem than that, because a movie that you shut down halfway through is actually not anything. It's not a movie. It's not property. It's not anything that you can do any business with, because it's not finished. And so I sort of came home from Canada from that experience, like questioning if my call was still correct, because it was such a hard, it was just a hard circumstance. I attend Saddleback Church, you know, for the last 20 years has been my home church, and through the grapevine, Pastor Rick Warren called me, and he said, look, I heard what happened to you, and he sort of gave me a little bit of a come to Jesus moment. He said, what made you think it was going to be easy? And
good question.
I said, wow, that's kind of a harsh bedside manner, Pastor Rick. You know, it's the truth is it's never been easy. I just didn't think it was going to be this hard.
Okay.
And he said, well, time out here. You're trying to do what nobody is asking for, but they absolutely need it. They desperately need it. So you're swimming upstream. So what's the difference between trying to make faith and family kind of programming that points to the gospel or to the great virtues or the Ten Commandments or the great virtues of the Bible and Western civilization? What's the difference between doing that and going over to Rwanda and trying to open up a clinic and having corrupt leaders sort of steal it, rob you blind, or tribal warfare, burn it to the ground? He said, what's the difference? He said, you're swimming upstream, and so you essentially, pick up your cross and follow, right? And he said, there is no such thing as being uncalled. There's no theology for that. He said, you don't get to unring that bell.
Wow.
He said, just like the Israelites came upon the brook that they were searching for water, and they came upon a brook that had dried up, that had at one time given them refreshment. He said, go find a new brook. And then he said, I got to go. and so it was a real sort of, spanking that I got because I was being a whiner, about all my frustrations and questioning my calling and all of that. And honestly, it was 2 months later that I was approached to get involved in Captive and write the screenplay and get involved in the project. And while I was trying to rebuild that other project, here comes Captive, which involves the purpose-driven life.
Right.
So that when I say divine intervention, for me it was absolutely no doubt in my mind.
So you said it was 2 months later after this pep talk?
Yeah, about 2 months after.
That's pretty amazing.
The movie fell apart, and Pastor Rick gave me the come to Jesus call. Then comes this movie opportunity,
and you can see how that book is involved. As the first half of the show, Terry Botwick was telling us how so many people who were involved in the story were actually reading the book at the same time as all these events were happening. I mean, the court judge, the gentleman who was killed for his truck, not to mention, of course, Ashley Smith, the main character, who was held hostage. Just so many things happened, and and I always like to ask filmmakers, especially faithful filmmakers who are Christians, what kind of divine interventions or miracles, answered prayers did you experience during the making of the film, and also as a result of people watching the film?
Well, for me, when you talk about making a film, it backs all the way up to the screenplay, right? To the blueprints, blueprints for the building you're building. The movie process is in this case was about a 5 to 6 year process, going from getting involved back in the early days to writing the script and getting our actors on board and getting money and distribution. All of that was a long process. So there wasn't a day in that process that went by for me that didn't feel like there was some sort of divine intervention. We look for big miracles as believers. The world looks for big miracles. I've come to feel that there are thousands of little tiny miracles happening all around us that we don't even notice because we're too dense and we're too dumb to look for them, right?
Interesting.
And so, to me, God, that's how God works through. It's a tapestry. It's not a splash of paint on a white canvas, right? It's a tapestry. And every little thread of that tapestry is a tiny miracle that God is weaving together for His glory, for our sustenance and for our calling and His will for us. So anyway, so we could go for 5 episodes of your show and talk about so many different things, but let me just point out, beyond the fact that I got pulled into this movie in the first place, sort of at a miraculous time in my life when I needed that to happen, I needed something like this to happen. Let me give you another piece of how God was weaving the miraculous tapestry together.
Okay.
We finally finished a script. I finally finished a script that everybody agreed was ready for prime time, and that took a while. You go through a lot of drafts. There's a lot of cooks in the kitchen, and so you it takes a while to get to the point. It's like blueprints for skyrise. I mean,
right.
They're refined as you go along.
It's got to be really good.
Or the skyscraper is a house of cards.
Right, yeah. I mean, before they even make the foundation, the blueprints have to be great.
Exactly. So we have a script ready to go, and now what? Okay? In the movie business, there's kind of a rule of thumb that, might seem kind of like wonky for most people, but this is the rule of thumb. Talent in the way of casting, actors, talent chases material, aka screenplay, and money, financing, distribution chases talent.
Ah, okay.
Right? Money, distribution, financing does not chase scripts.
Okay.
You have to have much more momentum than a screenplay to get a movie made. And so here's the miraculous thread in terms of David Oyelowo. Here's how that works. There's a fellowship gathering on the third Tuesday of every month in Hollywood that meets at the Writers Guild of America Theater. It's all believers coming together for worship, music, and a inspiring, encouraging message by Pastor Jeff Perry, who is the pastor of the St. Louis Family Church. And that was Kurt Warner's church in St. Louis. And so Jeff Perry flies out on his own dime every month, and he meets with us for a couple hours on the third Tuesday of every month at the Writers Guild Theater.
Wow.
David Oyelowo and his wife Jessica are strong believers. They've been strong believers, since they were teenagers. And so David has attended Third Tuesday many times, and he's become friends with a mutual friend of ours, Marcy Gold, who was at St. Louis Family Church back when she was a teenager. Okay? Let's follow this. I worked with Marcy Gold on Touched by an Angel.
Oh, wow.
He was a co-producer on Touched by an Angel. Marcy became a friend. Marcy read my script. Marcy had the lightning, the light bulb went on in her mind, and she said, "Brian, could I give this to David Oyelowo to read?" And I love David Oyelowo. I've been a big fan of his since he was a star in the United Kingdom on television shows and movies there. And I said, "Are you kidding? That would be fantastic." So she gave it to David. He read it in one sitting overnight, and he called her back the next day, and he said, "I don't know who these guys are, but you tell them that if they don't cast me to play Brian Nichols in this movie, I'm going to stalk them." like Brian Nichols stalked Atlanta. Obviously he was tongue in cheek there, but
yeah, no kidding.
Like the bottom line for us was, wow, this guy, this is huge.
That is amazing.
Money chases talent. They don't chase our script; they chase talent.
Right.
And so we met with him, and he jumped on board the project full gusto, and he has been hugely influential in getting this movie made.
Sure, of course.
That to me was, who would have known that? Who would have anticipated that little moment? Getting actors on board your script is really hard to do.
Right.
Especially actors like Kate Mara and David Oyelowo. They're big stars now.
Right,
so
right.
Getting them to come aboard your project is very difficult to do. They have agents, managers, and this process, because of Marcy and because of God's intervention, sidestepped all that nonsense. And here we are having a conversation directly with David, a meeting with David after he reads the script saying, "Hey, I want to be involved."
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, that's just one big example that I experienced.
That is great. And wow, man. Well, again, friend, you're listening to Divine Intervention Radio. I'm your host, Daniel Fazina, and our special guest is Brian Bird. He is the executive producer and the screenplay writer of the amazing new film, Captive. Please go see it. You can find the trailer at captivethemovie.com. And Brian, unfortunately, we're out of time, but I really enjoyed sitting down with you and hearing some of your perspectives. And I guess if there's any last bit of advice you want to give to anyone listening who maybe they don't even believe in God, or maybe they don't realize that He's there for them, what would you like to say to them?
I would like to say this, Daniel. Folks, there are miracles happening all around you every day, and you just have to open your eyes and your ears and your heart to them. And when you do, you can't help but understand there's a God who loves you so much that He wants you to be His child. He wants you to join Him in heaven when you pass away. And those miracles are all there to point you to Him if you'll just open your eyes.
Amen. Amen. Brian Bird, thank you so much again for sharing with us on Divine Intervention. I really appreciate you, and I ask you that you just continue to shine for Jesus in Hollywood. Keep up the great work.
Thanks, Daniel.
All right, once again, the film is called Captive. Go see it, and again, check out the trailer, www.captivethemovie.com. CaptiveTheMovie.com. Our special guest has been executive producer and screenplay writer Brian Bird. That about wraps up this episode of Divine Intervention. I hope it has encouraged you to know that God is real and He's still working in the world and doing miracles. God willing, we'll see you again next time for another exciting episode of Divine Intervention Radio. Take care and God bless.
You've been listening to Divine Intervention with your host, Daniel Fazina. You can email Daniel at divineintervention@mail.com. That's divineintervention@mail.com. All programs of Divine Intervention are available online at divineinterventionradio.com. That's divineinterventionradio.com. Join us next time here on Divine Intervention.
I believe in miracles.
Hey, this is Daniel Fazina of Divine Intervention Radio. The Bible contains some incredible stories of miracles and divine interventions. Jesus calmed a raging storm, healed paralytics, and even raised the dead. But are these types of events still happening today? The answer to this question, as you will see from reading my book, Divine Intervention, 50 True Stories of God's Miracles Today, is an emphatic yes. Contained within the book is a collection of amazing true stories that attest to this fact. You will read the astonishing first-hand accounts of people who have been healed of paralysis, terminal cancer, and tumors through prayer. You will see the love of God powerfully transform the life of an Islamic terrorist. You will witness the liberation of the demon-possessed, the resurrection of the dead, and much more. Prepare to be awed and inspired as you experience Divine Intervention. More information about Divine Intervention, 50 True Stories of God's Miracles Today can be found at www.divineinterventionradio.com or by calling 800-247-4784. That's 1-800-247-4784. Divine Intervention welcomes the support of Latirzo Associates, Certified Public Accountants. Latirzo Associates, Certified Public Accountants is a family-owned and operated Christian business serving their clients with quality accounting services for over 40 years, offering full-service accounting for any type of business, large or small, in any state of the union. Latirzo Associates, Certified Public Accountants, 12 Oak Street, No. 5, West Hampton Beach, New York, 11978. Phone 631-288-3334. That's 631-288-3334. Times are tough, not getting easier, but there's an opportunity that could make a significant change in your financial situation. People are paying too much for home utilities, and everybody has them. Help friends and family save money and get paid for it. No obligation. You don't even have to talk to anyone unless you want to. Just listen to a 3-minute recorded message. Call now, 715-GET-CASH. That's 715-GET-CASH. Listen, decide, and you could be on your way to a better tomorrow. 715-438-2274. That's 715-GET-CASH.